You have empty pockets, and I have a waiting bed," the giant cowboy confessed to the lonely teacher. The small town of Red Willow was quiet most of the year, but today it seemed even quieter than usual. Dust swirled in lazy spirals along the wooden streets, and the sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in gold. Clara Morgan walked slowly down the main road, holding a small bag filled with her few belongings. She had never been to Red Willow before, but letters from the town's school board promised a new beginning, a chance to teach children and make a place for herself in the world. Clara was young, but determined. Her brown hair was tied neatly behind her head, and her clothes were simple but tidy. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, yet every step she took seemed to echo in the empty street. The town itself was humble. A general store, a blacksmith, and a tiny post office formed the heart of the community, while a few wooden houses lined the dirt streets. The schoolhouse stood at the far end of town, a small one-room building with peeling white paint and a creaking sign that read, "Red Willow School." As Clara approached the schoolhouse, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had prepared for this moment for months, studying lesson plans and imagining the eager faces of her students. Yet, as she stepped through the schoolhouse door, the reality of the work ahead hit her. The room smelled faintly of chalk and old wood. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. Wooden desks were arranged in neat rows, but some were chipped or wobbling. It was simple, but it had potential. Clara could see herself shaping young minds in this very space, and a small smile touched her lips. After inspecting the room, she walked outside and looked around the town once more. Children ran along the streets, kicking up dust, and a few women hung laundry on lines strung between houses. She noticed how everyone seemed to know each other. They greeted each other with familiarity she did not yet share. Clara realized that being a newcomer in a tight-knit town like Red Willow would not be easy. She would need to earn their trust, prove her worth, and show that she belonged. It was then that she first saw him. Standing near the stables, moving slowly as if he carried the weight of the world on his broad shoulders, was Jackson. He was a giant of a man, easily 6'6", with broad shoulders and hands large enough to lift a barrel with ease. His hat shaded his face, but Clara could see the sharp lines of his jaw and the calm, steady expression in his eyes. He worked quietly, grooming horses and checking fences, moving with a grace that seemed unusual for someone of his size. There was a stillness to him, a presence that made the air around him feel heavier. Clara felt a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. She had heard stories about Jackson, how he had grown up on a nearby ranch and how his strength and size made him both respected and feared in the town. Some said he was kind, while others whispered that he was stubborn and temperamental. She was not sure what to make of him, but something about the way he moved, so quietly and purposefully, made her want to know more. Days passed and Clara settled into her routine. She woke early to sweep the schoolhouse floor, filled the inkwells for the students, and prepared lessons on reading, writing, and arithmetic. Children trickled in each morning, shy and curious, and she greeted each one with a warm smile. Some of the older children had never been taught by a proper teacher before, and she could see their hunger for knowledge in their bright eyes. Even with the joy of teaching, Clara felt the loneliness that came with living alone in a new town. The evenings were the hardest. After dinner, she would sit in her small, sparsely furnished cabin, the walls echoing with silence. She missed the laughter of friends, the comforting voice of her family, and even the noise of a crowded classroom back home. At times, she wondered if she had made a mistake in coming to Red Willow, but she would shake the thought away. She had come here to build a life, and she would not let fear or doubt stop her. One afternoon, as Clara walked back from the general store with a small bundle of groceries, she noticed Jackson again. He was leaning against the fence of the ranch, watching the horses graze. The sun highlighted the muscles in his arms and the calm in his face. He tipped his hat slightly as she approached, a simple gesture, yet one that made her heart flutter in a way she did not expect. "Afternoon, Miss Morgan," he said in a low, steady voice. His tone was respectful, not commanding, and it carried a warmth she had not anticipated. "Good afternoon," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She felt shy under his gaze, though she could not explain why. For several moments they stood in silence, watching the horses. Clara noticed how careful Jackson was with them, speaking in soft tones and moving slowly so as not to startle the animals. She realized that his size and strength were matched by gentleness, a quality that seemed rare in a man of his reputation. Finally, he spoke again. "The children like having a proper teacher," he said. "You'll find they respect you, but it takes time. Folks here, they're slow to trust strangers." Clara nodded. "I hope so. I want to help them learn. That's why I came here." Jackson studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "I can tell you mean it. Keep at it, and you'll make a difference." His words, simple as they were, gave Clara a sense of comfort she had not felt since arriving. There was no flattery, no hidden agenda, just honesty. She realized that in a town full of suspicion and quiet judgments, Jackson's calm presence was a rare kind of support. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Jackson's paths crossed often. He would quietly assist with small tasks, repairing the broken fence near the school, carrying water barrels, or leaving a loaf of bread on her doorstep without a word. Clara began to notice the small details, the way he cleaned the chalkboard for her, how he helped children carry their books, and the quiet pride in his posture when they succeeded in lessons. Despite his size and reputation, Clara began to see Jackson as a gentle guardian of the town, and in particular, of her. She felt an unspoken connection with him, though she did not yet fully understand it. His presence made the town feel less intimidating, and his quiet confidence reminded her that strength could be gentle and protective, not just forceful. One late afternoon, Clara stayed behind to finish grading papers. The classroom was silent except for the scratching of her pen. She heard the creak of the floorboards outside and looked up to see Jackson standing at the doorway, silhouetted by the setting sun. "Working late again?" he asked softly. Clara smiled tiredly.
"Yes, I want to make sure the lessons are ready for tomorrow."
He nodded, then quietly walked away, leaving her with a sense of calm she could not explain. That evening, as she lit a small lamp in her cabin, Clara reflected on the weeks that had passed. She had faced loneliness, doubt, and the challenge of gaining the town's trust. Yet, amidst it all, she had found moments of kindness, small gestures of care, and a sense of connection with someone she had only just begun to understand. As Clara lay in bed that night, listening to the wind rustle through the dry trees, she realized that life in Red Willow would not be easy, but it held possibilities. She thought of Jackson not just as the giant cowboy of local legend, but as a man of quiet strength and unexpected kindness. A small smile crept across her face. Perhaps, she thought, the town was not as lonely as it seemed, and perhaps she was not as alone as she had feared. The first part of Clara's journey in Red Willow was just beginning, but already she sensed that something meaningful was growing, a connection, fragile yet promising, that would change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. Clara woke early the next morning, the first light of dawn spilling over the horizon like soft gold. The schoolhouse was quiet, except for the faint rustling of leaves outside. She stretched, feeling the soreness from yesterday's work, the sweeping of the floor, carrying firewood, and the constant bending over desks. Teaching was harder than she had imagined. The children were eager to learn, yes, but they had habits and routines shaped by the dusty town life, and it took patience to guide them gently without making them feel scolded. After a simple breakfast of bread and tea, Clara set out for the schoolhouse, her satchel filled with books, chalk, and papers. She walked past the stables where Jackson already worked, the large man bending over the fence with careful precision. He looked up briefly and nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Clara felt a flutter in her chest at the sight. She had grown used to seeing him there, quietly going about his work. Yet every time she did, she was reminded of his strength and the calm assurance he seemed to carry. The morning lessons went well. Children recited their letters, practiced writing words, and counted numbers aloud. Clara felt a sense of satisfaction as she watched their faces light up with understanding. Yet she also felt the weight of responsibility. Each child depended on her, and she was determined not to let them down. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, she carefully packed up her things and began the walk back to her small cabin, the sun high in the sky and the wind warm on her face. It was on this walk that she noticed something unusual. A small group of children had gathered near the town well, struggling to lift buckets of water. Clara hurried over to help, but before she could reach them, a large shadow fell across the well. Jackson had arrived, and with his broad hands, he lifted the heavy buckets with ease. The children stared in awe, giggling and whispering to each other. Clara watched, a smile spreading across her face. Jackson handed the buckets to the children, his voice gentle, yet commanding. "Take them slowly. Don't spill," he said. The children nodded, carefully following his instructions. Clara felt a warmth in her chest, realizing how much his presence mattered. He did not boast or demand attention. He simply helped, quietly and effectively. As the children ran off to finish their chores, Clara caught up to him. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged, his expression calm. They were struggling. Someone needed to help. You've done enough for them already. Clara felt a strange mix of gratitude and admiration. There was something about Jackson that made ordinary tasks seem important, almost honorable. She realized that his kindness was not in words, but in actions, and that made it feel more genuine, more lasting. Over the next few days, Clara began to notice small gestures from Jackson that she had not seen before. He would leave extra firewood by her cabin in the mornings, always stacked neatly. Sometimes she would find fresh eggs or bread left on her doorstep, with no note, no explanation, just a quiet act of care. At first, she felt embarrassed by the attention. She was proud and independent, and she did not want anyone to think she needed help. But deep down, she could not deny the comfort it brought her, especially in moments when loneliness pressed heavily on her heart. One afternoon, Clara faced a particularly difficult challenge. A student named Tommy, a boy of about 9, had trouble reading. He would get frustrated easily, slamming his small fists on the desk when he could not pronounce words correctly. Clara knelt beside him, speaking softly, trying different methods, but nothing seemed to work. Tommy's eyes welled with tears, and he muttered that he was stupid and would never learn. Clara felt a pang of helplessness. She wanted to comfort him, but she also needed him to believe in himself. Just as she reached for another book, a large shadow fell over the desk. Jackson's voice, deep and calm, cut through the tension.
"Hey, Tommy, look at me."
"You're doing fine. Everyone learns in their own way. Keep going, little man. Don't give up." Tommy looked up, eyes wide, and a small smile appeared. With Jackson's encouragement, he tried again, and this time he read a sentence correctly. Clara felt her heart lift. She realized then that Jackson's presence brought more than physical help. It brought confidence and reassurance. Even the smallest gestures could change someone's day, perhaps even their life. Despite these small victories, Clara still struggled with the isolation of her new life. The townsfolk were polite, but many remained distant. They had lived in Red Willow for generations, and outsiders were often met with suspicion. Clara had to remind herself daily that she had come here to teach, to make a life, and to find her own place. Jackson seemed to understand this without words. He never pushed, never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. He simply existed near her, a steady, reassuring presence. Evenings were the hardest. Clara would sit by her small lamp, reading or writing lesson plans, the silence pressing in around her. Sometimes she would look out the window toward the ranch and see Jackson tending the horses or fixing fences, the golden light of sunset catching his broad frame. She felt a strange comfort in the knowledge that he was there, quietly doing his work, a man who seemed as much a part of Red Willow as the land itself. One evening, as Clara prepared for bed, there was a soft knock on her cabin door. She opened it to find Jackson standing there, holding a small bundle of fresh bread. "Thought you might like this for tomorrow," he said quietly. Clara felt her cheeks flush. "You didn't have to?" she said, taking the bread. He shrugged, his large shoulders moving easily. "I like to help when I can." There was a moment of silence. Clara realized how much she had come to rely on these small acts of kindness, not just for the practical help, but for the reassurance that someone cared, that she was not completely alone. She smiled and thanked him, and he nodded before turning to leave. The sight of him walking back toward the stables, tall and steady, stayed with her long after he was gone. The days passed in a rhythm that was both exhausting and comforting. Clara woke, taught, tended to her cabin, and walked through the dusty streets, sometimes seeing Jackson, sometimes not. Their relationship remained unspoken, quiet, but it grew with each small interaction. She began to understand him in ways she could not fully explain. The patience behind his actions, the kindness behind his silence, the subtle way he seemed to notice everything without needing to say anything. One Saturday, Clara was walking through town when she overheard a few townsfolk talking about her. "She's a good teacher," one man said, tipping his hat, "but she's too quiet. Can't be much of a friend to anyone." Clara felt a pang of sadness. She had hoped to fit in, to be accepted not just as a teacher, but as a person. She realized then that it would take time, that trust and friendship were earned slowly, especially in a place like Red Willow. But she also felt a sense of resolve. She would continue to work, to care for her students, and to find her place in the town. That evening, she walked past the stables one last time. Jackson was there, grooming a horse with the same careful attention he had shown from the beginning. He looked up as she passed, and for a moment, their eyes met. Clara felt a strange warmth in that look, a connection she could not yet name. He gave her a small nod, and she nodded back, feeling as though the silent understanding between them had grown just a little stronger. As Clara lay in bed that night, she thought about the days that had passed since her arrival. She had faced challenges, loneliness, and moments of doubt. Yet she had also found kindness, small joys, and a sense of connection that made the town feel less intimidating. And somewhere in the quiet of Red Willow, she knew that her life was beginning to change, not dramatically, but in small, meaningful ways. She closed her eyes, thinking of Jackson, the children, and the small victories of the day. Perhaps life in Red Willow was not as lonely as it seemed. Perhaps, she realized with a quiet smile, the town and even the people in it had room for her after all. And perhaps, somewhere along the way, she would discover that friendship, trust, and even love could grow from the simplest of gestures, the quietest of moments, and the gentlest of hearts. The weather changed slowly as the weeks passed. The air grew cooler in the mornings, and the wind carried the smell of dry grass and distant rain. Clara noticed these changes as she walked to the schoolhouse each day. She had begun to feel more settled in Red Willow, but inside her heart, something was shifting. Life no longer felt like a straight path. It felt like a quiet question, waiting for an answer. Teaching continued to fill her days. The children had grown comfortable with her, and their laughter often echoed through the schoolhouse. Clara found joy in small successes, when a shy child spoke up, when a struggling student finally understood a lesson. Yet, when the classroom emptied and silence returned, she felt the weight of loneliness again. It was not the sharp pain she had felt when she first arrived, but a softer ache, one that lingered quietly. Jackson remained a steady part of her life, though their interactions were still simple and few. He never stayed long when he helped. He never asked for thanks. Still, Clara noticed how often he seemed to appear when she needed help the most, a loose step fixed before she tripped, firewood delivered before a cold night, a calm presence when her thoughts felt too heavy. One evening, dark clouds gathered quickly over Red Willow. The sky turned gray, and thunder rolled in the distance. Clara had stayed late at the schoolhouse, finishing lesson plans by the light of a small lamp. She did not realize how late it had grown until the wind rattled the windows. Rain began to fall, first softly, then harder, tapping against the roof like hurried fingers. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and stood ready to leave. But when she opened the door, a strong gust of wind pushed it back. The path home was dark and the rain was growing heavier. For a moment, she hesitated. She did not like the idea of walking alone in such weather. Just then, she heard footsteps outside. "Miss Morgan?" Jackson's voice came through the rain, calm and steady. Relief washed over her. She opened the door wider and saw him standing there, hat pulled low, coat darkened by rain. He held a lantern in one hand. "I thought you might still be here," he said. "Storm came faster than expected." Clara nodded. "I was just about to leave, but the weather..." She trailed off, feeling foolish. He glanced at the sky, then back at her. "It's not safe to walk alone right now. You can wait here until it passes." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right." They sat inside the schoolhouse, the lantern casting warm light across the room. Outside, rain poured steadily, and thunder rolled like distant drums. The familiar desks and chalkboard looked different in the soft glow, almost gentle. For a while, neither of them spoke. Clara listened to the rain and felt aware of Jackson's presence beside her. He sat quietly, hands resting on his knees, eyes thoughtful. The silence felt different from before, not empty, but full, as if words were waiting for the right moment. "You work very hard," Jackson said finally. Clara looked at him. "I try to."
The children deserve that. He nodded. They do.
And so do you.
His words surprised her.
What do you mean?
He took a slow breath.
You give everything to others.
"But you carry a lot alone." Clara felt her chest tighten. She had not realized how visible her loneliness was.
"I chose this life," she said softly. "I wanted to be independent."
"And you are," Jackson replied. "That doesn't mean you have to be alone." The rain softened outside, But inside the room, the moment felt heavy with meaning. Clara studied his face, seeing past the strong frame and quiet manner. She saw a man who understood solitude deeply. "Why do you help me so much?" she asked gently. "You never ask for anything." Jackson looked down for a moment, then back up. "Because I know what it's like to feel unseen. And because I care." The word hung between them. Clara felt her heart beat faster. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time. "Care can mean many things," she said carefully.
Yes, he agreed. And I don't want to pressure you. I just wanted you to know the truth.
Thunder rumbled again, softer now. Clara felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, fear, warmth, and uncertainty. She had built her life around being strong and self-reliant. Letting someone close felt risky. Jackson shifted slightly. "I won't pretend I have much to offer," he said honestly. "I don't have wealth or fine words, just a place, a steady life, and respect." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You came here with little more than hope. And I have a home that waits quietly every night." I thought, maybe those two things could meet. Clara understood what he meant. There was no demand in his voice, no expectation, just openness. She swallowed. "I don't know what the future holds," she said. "I've been on my own for so long." "I'm not asking you to decide anything now," Jackson said. "Only to know you wouldn't be alone if you didn't want to be." The rain slowed to a gentle drizzle. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of being understood. "No one has ever said that to me before," she admitted. Jackson stood and picked up the lantern. "Storm's easing. I can walk you home." They stepped outside together. The air smelled fresh and the ground glistened under the lantern light. They walked side by side, their steps slow and quiet. When they reached Clara's cabin, she stopped at the door. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the walk. He nodded.
"Get some rest." As he turned to leave, Clara spoke again. "Jackson?" He looked back.
"I'm glad you told me," she said. "Even if I don't have all the answers yet." A small smile crossed his face. "That's enough." That night, Clara lay awake longer than usual. Her thoughts drifted back to the schoolhouse, the storm, and Jackson's words. She realized something important had changed. Not her life, not yet, but her understanding of it. For the first time, the idea of sharing her journey did not feel like weakness. It felt like possibility. Outside, the town slept peacefully. And in the quiet of Red Willow, two lonely lives had moved just a little closer, not through force or promise, but through honesty, patience, and respect. The days after the storm felt different for Clara. Nothing had changed on the surface. The schoolhouse still stood at the end of the dusty road. The children still arrived each morning with their books and restless energy. The town still moved at its slow, familiar pace. Yet inside Clara, something had shifted. Jackson's words stayed with her, repeating quietly in her thoughts during lessons, during meals, even in her dreams. She tried to focus on her work, reminding herself why she had come to Red Willow. Teaching was her purpose. Independence was her pride. Still, when she looked out the classroom window and saw Jackson in the distance, working steadily under the sun, her heart felt heavier and warmer at the same time. The town began to notice, too. It started with glances, a pause in conversation when Clara walked by, a look exchanged between two women outside the general store. No one spoke openly, but Clara could feel the change in the air. Red Willow was small and news traveled fast even when nothing had been said aloud. One afternoon after class, Clara was invited to tea at the home of Mrs. Harper, one of the older women in town. The invitation was polite but formal. Clara accepted, hoping it was a sign of growing acceptance. Mrs. Harper's home was tidy and quiet. As they sat across from each other, cups steaming gently between them, the woman studied Clara carefully. "You've done good work with the children," Mrs. Harper said. "We're grateful for that." "Thank you," Clara replied sincerely. Mrs. Harper hesitated, then continued.
But people are...
"Curious. You spend time near the ranch often?" "With Jackson." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "He helps when he can. That's all." Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. "Jackson is a good man, but he lives a simple life. Hard work, few comforts. A woman like you..." She paused, choosing her words. "You should think carefully about your path." Clara understood the meaning behind the polite tone. The town was not warning her about danger. It was warning her about change. "I am thinking carefully," Clara said quietly. When she left the house, her hands felt cold, even in the warm afternoon sun. She realized that whatever choice she made would not be hers alone. The town would judge it. The children would notice. Her future would be shaped by it. That evening, Clara stayed late at the schoolhouse again, not because of work, but because she needed time to think. She sat at her desk, staring at an unfinished lesson plan, her thoughts drifting. She had worked so hard to build a life on her own terms. Depending on someone, even emotionally, felt frightening. Yet Jackson had never asked her to give anything up. He had never tried to guide her choices. He had simply stood beside her, steady and patient. Outside, voices rose suddenly. Clara rushed to the door and saw smoke rising from the far edge of town. A small fire had broken out near one of the storage barns. People were already running toward it, buckets in hand. Clara did not hesitate. She gathered water and joined them. The heat was strong, the smoke thick, but everyone worked together. Jackson was there, moving quickly, guiding people, lifting heavy beams away from the flames. His voice stayed calm even as the situation grew tense. At one point, Clara slipped on loose ground. Before she could fall, Jackson caught her arm, steadying her. "Careful," he said firmly, not scolding, just concerned. She nodded, catching her breath. For a moment, surrounded by smoke and noise, their eyes met. There was no room for doubt in that look, only trust. The fire was controlled before it could spread. When it was over, people stood exhausted but relieved. Clara looked around and realized something important. Jackson had not acted alone. He had worked with the town, not above it. People listened to him, respected him. Later that night, Clara sat on her cabin steps, watching the stars appear one by one. Her arms ached, her clothes smelled of smoke, but her mind felt clearer than it had in days. Footsteps approached. She knew who it was before she looked. "You did well today," Jackson said. "So, did you?" she replied. They sat in silence for a while. The night was cool, peaceful. "The town talks," Clara said finally. Jackson nodded. "They always do. It scares me," she admitted. "Not because of you, because of what choosing means." He turned to face her. "Whatever you choose, it should be yours, not theirs." She looked at him, really looked at him, not as the giant cowboy, not as the quiet helper, but as a man who respected her strength and her fears. "I don't want to lose myself," she said softly. "You won't," he replied without hesitation. "I wouldn't walk beside someone who had to become smaller to do it." Those words settled deep inside her. Over the next few days, Clara made a quiet decision, not about the future, but about the present. She stopped hiding her gratitude. She spoke more openly with Jackson. She allowed herself to sit beside him at town gatherings, to share simple meals, to laugh when moments allowed. The town noticed again, but this time, Clara did not feel the same fear. She stood straighter. She taught with the same dedication. She lived with the same independence. One afternoon, as she walked home from the schoolhouse, children ran past her, laughing, calling out goodbye. Jackson waited near the fence, as he often did. "Walk with me?" he asked. She nodded. As they moved down the familiar road together, Clara realized something had changed, not because of a single moment, but because of many small ones. Trust, respect, choice. She had not given up her life. She had opened it. And for the first time since arriving in Red Willow, Clara felt certain, not of where her path would lead, but of the strength she carried while walking it. The days grew warmer as spring arrived in Red Willow. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass, and the soft hum of life returned to the town. Clara had found a rhythm in her work, teaching the children and tending to her small cabin. The loneliness that had once pressed heavily on her heart was now lighter, softened by the steady presence of Jackson and the small joys she found in everyday life. She often woke early, just before sunrise, to walk through the fields near the schoolhouse. The air was crisp and quiet, and she could hear the distant lowing of cows or the chirping of birds. Sometimes she would see Jackson in the distance, working on the ranch or walking slowly toward the stables. The sight of him no longer startled her. Instead, it brought a sense of calm, like the land itself had grown kinder because of him. Teaching continued to be her anchor. The children were thriving, and she had grown to know each of their personalities, strengths, and fears. She laughed more often now, especially when the children shared stories or silly mistakes from their day. She had learned that being part of a community did not mean losing herself. She could be independent and still accept support, guidance, and companionship. Jackson had become a quiet part of that rhythm. He never demanded her attention, never asked her to change. He simply existed in a way that allowed her to be fully herself. Some afternoons he would come by the schoolhouse to check on repairs or to help carry heavy supplies. Other times he would stop on his way to the ranch just to nod or smile at her, a small acknowledgement that made her heart lift. One afternoon, Clara was preparing the schoolhouse for a special lesson. She had gathered the children to teach them about the world beyond Red Willow, using maps and books she had brought from her previous home. The excitement in the room was lively, but Clara's mind wandered occasionally. She thought about the quiet evenings she had shared with Jackson, the long walks, and the moments of trust and honesty they had exchanged. After class, she stepped outside to catch her breath. The sun was warm on her back, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees. Jackson was there, leaning against the fence, watching the children run and play. When he saw her, he straightened and smiled. "Hello, Miss Morgan," he said. "Hello, Jackson," she replied, her voice soft. They walked together toward the main road, their steps slow and comfortable. For the first time, Clara realized how natural it felt to be beside him. There was no tension, no hesitation, just a quiet companionship that had grown over weeks of shared moments. "You seem happy," Jackson said quietly, almost as if testing the truth of her own feelings. Clara looked down at the ground, then back up at him. "I am," she admitted. "I've learned a lot here. About teaching, about living, and about trusting others.
I'm glad. You deserve that.
She smiled. I couldn't have done it alone. Nor could I, he said, his voice low but steady. You've reminded me why it's worth caring, why it's worth patience. Clara felt warmth rise in her chest. She had spent so long protecting her heart, so long convinced that relying on someone else would make her weak. But Jackson had shown her that strength and care could exist together, that independence did not mean loneliness. The town itself seemed to accept her more fully now. The gossip that had once hovered at the edges of conversations had softened. People had seen her dedication, her courage during the fire, and the way she interacted with the children. They respected her, quietly and sincerely. Some of the women would stop to chat during errands, while others nodded politely, acknowledging her presence without words. The children's parents expressed gratitude openly, reinforcing Clara's sense of purpose. One evening, after a long day of teaching, Clara walked toward her cabin and saw Jackson waiting near the fence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The sight of him against the fading light felt like a promise of stability and trust. "You've been thinking," he said quietly, his voice gentle. Clara nodded. "About everything. About the town, the children, and about us." Jackson's expression was calm, open. "And what have you decided?" She smiled, a mix of relief and certainty in her eyes. "I've decided to live fully, to accept help and companionship without fear, to be part of this town and part of your life, if you'll have me." He stepped closer, his large hand brushing against hers. "I will," he said simply. "I've never asked for more than your trust, and now I have it." The moment was quiet, not dramatic or loud, but powerful. Clara realized that life's greatest moments often came without fanfare, in honesty, in trust, and in simple acknowledgement of care. She felt a lightness in her heart she had not known for years. From that day forward, Clara's life in Red Willow shifted. She continued teaching with the same dedication, her lessons enriched by the confidence and happiness she now carried. Jackson remained by her side, not as a protector or guardian, but as a partner in the quiet rhythm of daily life. They shared simple moments that felt extraordinary, tending to the children together, repairing fences on the ranch, gathering firewood, sharing meals, and walking under the wide open sky. Each act, no matter how small, reinforced their connection. They had built something steady, not hurried or forced, but genuine and lasting. The town slowly grew accustomed to their companionship. The children adored both of them, and even the cautious townsfolk came to appreciate the balance Clara and Jackson brought to Red Willow. Clara realized that she had become part of the community, not by changing herself, but by allowing others to see her true self. One bright morning, Clara and Jackson walked toward the schoolhouse together. The air was filled with the scent of fresh grass and the distant sound of horses. Children ran past, calling greetings, laughing and shouting in joy. Clara's heart swelled. She had found a place where she belonged, not just in Red Willow, but in the lives she touched every day. Jackson looked at her, his large frame calm against the bright sky. "We've come far," he said softly. Clara nodded. "Yes, and we're just beginning." They walked side by side, knowing that life would bring challenges, as it always did. But now, Clara felt ready. She had the courage to face hardships, the strength to protect her independence, and the comfort of knowing someone she trusted completely would walk beside her. As the sun dipped lower, painting the town in golden light, Clara realized that happiness was not something distant or unattainable. It was here, in quiet moments, in steady companionship, in the trust and care of someone who understood her. Jackson's presence had become more than comfort. It was a reminder that life could be full, even in a small town, even with simple beginnings.
That evening, Clara stood on the porch of her cabin, looking toward the distant fields.
Jackson joined her, silent but present. They watched as the sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving streaks of pink and purple across the sky.
Red Willow is beautiful at sunset, Clara said quietly.
Yes, Jackson agreed, especially when it feels like home. Clara leaned slightly toward him, feeling the ease of belonging. She thought of all the days of struggle, the moments of doubt, the loneliness she had felt since arriving. Now those days seemed like steps on a path that had led her here, to trust, to companionship, and to hope. In that quiet moment, Clara understood that life's meaning was not always in grand gestures or dramatic events. It was in the simple, steady presence of people who cared, in moments of honesty and kindness, and in the courage to open one's heart without fear.
Red Willow slept quietly around them.
The children were home with their families. The townsfolk rested after another day of work. And in the gentle stillness, Clara and Jackson shared something neither had expected. A life built not on wealth or fame, but on trust, respect, and the quiet strength of love. As night fell, Clara knew that whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with confidence. She had found her place in the town, in her work, and in her heart. And beside her, steady and unwavering, was a man whose quiet presence had changed her life forever. Together they watched the stars appear in the darkening sky. Clara felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she was no longer alone, and that the life she had dreamed of was not only possible, but already here.